We've been active in Nigeria since 2015, and we've been working to strengthen the capacities of the Nigerian state and the Nigerian armed forces to protect civilians.
And what happens when the armed forces are not the perpetrators, when you have non-state actors perpetrating violence? How do you reach those people?
Yes, so that's unfortunately a problem that is common to many conflicts, and including Nigeria. Most civilians are harmed indeed by Boko Haram, the two factions in which it split recently. And first and foremost, the state has an obligation to protect civilians even from threats posed by other actors. So some of it is looking at ways that a government and a military can enhance the protection of communities that are under threat by other armed groups. And the second way is work with the communities themselves, who usually know where the threats come from and have some ideas about ways to protect themselves and need some support from outside sources and outside actors to better protect themselves.
And what can you provide civilians? You mentioned, or you hinted at, intelligence sharing and using civilians as information on the ground, but what else can you do to increase their resilience?
Yes, so we have a team in Maiduguri that travels around Borno State and works with communities to better understand from them their protection concerns, help them form community groups that are focused on protection, that are representative of different groups and genders, etc., and try to articulate what the main protection needs for the communities are, and then they can bring these concerns to local authorities, including their military forces that are stationed in that area. And that's what we do. We try to work with civilians and separately with armed forces about how they can better receive complaints and dialogue with civilians. And when we feel it's safe for civilians, we bring them together in neutral settings so that civilians can articulate their needs and the local authorities, including the military, can respond and hopefully implement some of the priorities that have been identified by the communities.
And when you're looking at Nigeria, where the worst of the conflict is so far away from the center, from the capital, from where decisions are made, do you find that security forces are receptive to your message?
Yes, in general, there's always a varied response from unit to unit, commander to commander. But in general, what we have found is that there is a political will to address the shortcomings and the problems.
Even away from the capital?
Even away from the capital, even at the 7th division level in Maiduguri, which is the division that is responsible for the security there. There is an understanding that protecting civilians is their mandate, and that they can learn better tools gleaned from other conflicts or from other experiences, and also from their own communities, on how to protect them. There are still abuses, and the abuses unfortunately coexist with this political will, but we believe that there is a progress ahead that can be continued.
And you must have been disappointed that the government was unable to get through the POC, the Civilian Protection Bill. What would you hope to see from this new administration? And I'm going to do this in two parts, one at the federal level and then again at state level, because we'll see a change of government there as well.
Yes, so indeed, my organization has been working with the Nigerian government, and most recently in close partnership with the Nigerian Human Rights Commission, to adopt a civilian protection policy, which would be a landmark policy for the Nigerian government, the first such policy adopted by an African government. Other governments in other parts of the world have it. And that would set a framework for the Nigerian state and all the institutions about the priority of protecting civilians in a conflict and the ways that institutions can do that. Unfortunately, the government didn't get to it. They announced publicly twice, once the Minister of Information and once the Minister of Justice, that they are in the process of adopting it. We understand it's gone to the highest level of government, and it's ready to be adopted. And we definitely hope that while there are so many priorities in the new administration, that this will be one of the first ones. A draft is ready, and it's just ready to be adopted.
It feels like the buzz, because a year ago, or a little bit less than a year ago, there was so much about this in the Nigerian press. It seemed to be very high up the political agenda. It doesn't seem to be quite as high, for obvious reasons. There are a lot of things that the new government needs to tackle, but it doesn't seem quite as high up the political agenda. Are you concerned about that?
Yes, we are concerned, especially because in the last few months, as you know, we have seen a spike in violence in Borno State and neighboring states, increased activities by militant groups, and talking with communities there, they really feel under siege by these increased attacks. There's increasing displacement. There is, improvised explosive devices planted by armed groups. There is a lot of problems, and of course, an increasing tempo in military operations. So this is really the time when Nigerian civilians in the Northeast need this policy to be adopted. So we hope that it will go back to the top of the agenda.
And will you have any workings with the new state government as well? Presumably, this you have to work at federal level and at state level. Have you had communication with the incoming state government?
Not yet with incoming state governments, but definitely they will have a very important role in this. Once the policy is adopted at the federal level, then it's up to all the institutions, including state institutions, to implement that policy. And so we are willing, my organization is willing to work at all levels for the benefit of Nigerian civilians.
And you recently made some very interesting comments at the Security Council, and one of the things that you spoke about was helping governments to see these conflicts through a gender lens. So, yes. And that was one of the top things that you mentioned.
Yeah, absolutely, because the conflict is experienced differently by men, women, children, and boys. There is no doubt that traditionally we have seen conflict and the conflict resolution and protection through a lens that is mostly the lens of combatants, who are usually male. And in Nigeria, but everywhere, women have their own specific needs and that need to be taken into account when one designs protection policies.
And what more would you like to see? Because reading through your Security Council comments, it was very interesting, but it sounded like you threw a bit of a challenge down to the Security Council. So what more would you like to see from international security forces in Nigeria and elsewhere?
Yes, there is definitely a challenge there. And the challenge is we can't hide behind the belief that we can't do more about it. There is a lot, and some of it I spelled it in that statement, and a lot of other things are available that governments and the international community, including the UN Security Council, can do, and they are not doing. So we are working also with UN peacekeeping forces. They are not in Nigeria, but they are in many other African countries on their capacity to implement their protection of civilians mandate. As you know, most peacekeeping operations have that specific mandate and are struggling to deliver on that. And when it comes to other actors involved in Nigeria, our main ask is that they work with the Nigerian government and state forces to reinforce what we are trying to do. So we are definitely in contact with other member states that are partners of the Nigerians to really reinforce this message and make sure that in every intervention, the protection of civilians is paramount.
And in one quick sentence, or maybe two, what would you like to see? What's your top priority for the new Nigerian government to tackle?
Definitely adopt a protection of civilian policy and make it very public, make it clearly known to all state institutions that this is a priority of the president himself, and then work to implement it, support all the state institutions, and chiefly the Ministry of Defense and the Armed Forces to implement such policy, including through dedicating training of military forces in protection of civilians, which we have seen can give real strong results in improving protection for civilians.
Brilliant. Thank you, Federico.
Thank you very much.